Hey, what's going on, YouTube world? Thanks for joining in to another one of our live streams. Coming live this time from Minneapolis, Minnesota, based out of the Eagan area. If you ever get a chance to come up here, it's a great place to be. Maybe not right now. There's a little stuff chaotic going on, but come check out Minneapolis, especially in the summertime. It's super fun, super enjoyable times. So my name is Mike Sande. I'm a technical manager with SOLIDWORKS. I've been working with them for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years this November. And I've been with SOLIDWORKS in terms of the reseller channel for another 4 years past that. So almost 10 years of my life, which has been really fun. Today I'm super excited to talk about my favorite product, and that's SOLIDWORKS Visualize. It was brought into the portfolio back in 2015. And that's right around when I was hired on. So I had the opportunity to kind of raise my hand and take the lead on it, which worked out because I love it, and it works out for my background. I'm a passionate photographer as well, so it kind of collides my passions in terms of CAD design, engineering, and also photography, kind of graphic design, more that artistic side of things, and brings it together. So it looks like we got some people in the chat. I'm gonna make sure I can see your comments. I'll pop this out. Let me know where you're coming from. You know, I'm in Minnesota, where we have a 75, 80 degree kind of cloudy day, which is pretty typical this time of year. We'll get up into the hot stuff, but where are you? Where are you based? We know we've had people overseas. It's fun to have you tune in, so I appreciate you guys taking the time to check out the live design. So as you're typing that in, I want to just thank Jeremy Regner's from last week's live design. Jeremy spent an hour going over just some of the questions and the comments that we've had. So diving into, you know, if you're watching the recordings, you maybe don't get something, you go into the comments section in YouTube and ask your questions. Jeremy went through all of our episodes. This is the 16th, I believe, maybe the 17th. So we've done a ton of these. So you can go back, watch that huge catalog of the live design series, which has been SOLIDWORKS CAD based. Ask questions. We're going to be revisiting those kind of Q&A type live streams like last week. And then moving forward, you know, we're shooting for every Friday to do a live design. Let us know, is there a topic you want to see? I know not next week because we've got a holiday. We're celebrating the 4th of July here a day early, so we have the day off on Friday, which is going to be great. But following that, Michael Steves, who his second time on live design, is going to be hitting on apps for kids, which if you've got kids or you're just into subdivisional modeling, check it out. It's a really cool offering from Dassault Systems and SOLIDWORKS that really offers a designing platform for the young ones. You know, this is late elementary school to middle school age kids, early middle school, to be able to design their own toys. So super fun. And then after that, on the 17th, my boss, Brian Zayas, is going to be doing something cool. That's all he's alluded to so far. It will be really cool. He's a phenomenal guy, phenomenal modeler, very brilliant, great presenter. So definitely check out. The easiest way to do it, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. And as these come up, you can just get the reminder and it'll let you know when these are about to start. So Fridays at 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 Central. Make sure to tune in. Okay, cool. With that, let's dive into some rendering. But before we do, I want to just throw a few things out. So this is kind of how I go through the process of getting things ready to go into a rendering workflow and Visualize. I'm going to just start in CAD real quick in SOLIDWORKS and just talk about a few things that I do that are kind of, they're not best practices in terms of CAD techniques for large assembly performance, for modeling, but I do them to prep them going into Visualize. Any CAD platform, you'll be able to do these tools. So if you're not using SOLIDWORKS, no big deal. You can still walk through and just prep them a little bit. So when we do that import, they're going to look a little bit better, especially if you're doing real up close details. So I wanted to start here, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things I do and my workflow. Now, this isn't the said and done way to render things. As any art is out there, it's subjective to the artist and the audience. So, you may go about different ways, but hopefully you take away a few things that I do that might work for your workflow. So the model we'll use today, it's just a brake rotor. Any cyclists in the audience? I'm a big time mountain biker. I try to spend as much time on my mountain bike as I can, But I thought it'd be fun to model this up a few years back, and then for a recent video, I did on rendering. I walked through a process of comparing this with photography. So pretty basic, not a lot of components in here, but everything I'll show you today will translate over into bigger, broader stuff. So this is a good example for product photography. I was lucky to have the actual physical product to kind of compare to. Not always the case. That's where rendering can really step in, is when you're trying to figure out what is that final finish. But yeah, this is just a bike rotor, pretty cool design. It actually allows for some flotation, so self-alignment when you're riding. So we'll be walking through that. Man, we got people from India, Venezuela, Germany, Algeria, all over, Colombia. Salim, you got a question? If you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that as we go through. Feel free to try to derail me. We can answer those. Otherwise, swing back at the end. Otherwise, also, you can just put them in the comment section, and we'll go through those later on, and we can wrap them up if in case we missed it. Toronto, man, all over the world. Russia, this is so great. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's not 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock your time, lunchtime for me. So for those that, early morning, late evening, appreciate it. Pakistan, wow, this is great. So hello from around the globe. All right, cool. Let's dive in. So the first thing I always start to do, and this is getting in my mindset of what is my end goal in rendering? What am I trying to do? And generally with product photography, we're going through and showing, some full-size shots. But oftentimes you're going to be getting in and taking some more detailed shots. And that's really where it gets to be a little bit trickier and a little bit easier for your audience to identify that doesn't quite look right. It looks computer generated, which isn't a big deal. But our standard as humans and as consumers is starting to get a higher bar every single month. I feel like I'm seeing new ad. I watched the new Ford truck rollout last night. Tons of brilliant animations all rendered. So we're expecting these really high class rendering techniques. So what I'll do is come in, and it's something like this where I know I've got up shots. The first thing to do is start breaking edges. And we're adding a lot of complexity in terms of the model. When we're talking about large design and in CAD and engineering, we don't say you don't need to add fillets everywhere. That's going to be done in a post process, generally after machining. They'll go through some polishing, some ball bearings or whatever to do that. But here, we need to accommodate for these perfectly sharp edges, because those do not exist in real life. And the human eye knows that. So when you see a rendering and you see a perfectly infinitely sharp edge, it tells your brain that's not quite right. Subconsciously, you realize that, and it's a little bit off. So here's a little CAD tip before we get to rendering, is you can create a configuration. So another variation of this, especially if you're working with a production model, make sure you're not modifying that. Create a second configuration, or even better, all said and done, you can create a pack and go of the entire assembly, create a new name, and just break it away. So pull it out of pull it to a separate folder in your data management vault. Just create this new instance and just make sure everyone knows this is for rendering, because we're going to be adding kind of unneeded complexity to it, but that's needed when we go into the rendering tool. So pack and go works. It just grabs all the reference components, sends it to a new location, and then we'll reference that. Or like what I've done is just created this render configuration at the assembly level, and then zooming in here, we'll actually see I have these super tiny fillets, right? These are 1 thou, 500 thou, I think. So tiny little fillets all throughout the model. You don't have to do it everywhere, but you definitely want to go through and start to refine any edge that you want to have a tighter up close shot to. So if I was doing a large automation piece of equipment and my renderings were going to be of the whole thing, maybe in a building or a warehouse, you don't have to do this. You're not going to see it. Your eye won't see that close of detail. But in this case, we're going to be doing some up close shots of this product. Make sure you're knocking these edges. SOLIDWORKS has got some great tools for it. We've been looking at the new fillet tool in our cloud-based CAD design and X design, which is super slick. But I do love the way that SOLIDWORKS does this. So you can come through and grab an edge, create a fillet, and then you'll get this little fillet selection tool comes up. Let's knock that down to like 0.05, and we'll continue this fillet with this like fillet by face. Grab the whole thing, grab the other side, grabs those edges, and just apply those. It is going to weigh down the model. You're going to lose a little performance, but no big deal. We're just prepping it for our rendering. So we're going to move this and send it back over. Okay, so make sure you're knocking edges specifically in areas where you're going to have detail. Oh shoot, let me. Sorry guys, I'm not showing my screen. I gotta switch over. You're just staring at me. Okay, there we go. I apologize. Yeah, do you mean to show the screen? I do. Thank you. So Brian reaching out, letting me know. You should see me now. So we're in SolidWorks. Here's the CAD model. As I mentioned, my variation of this, and we're up and running. Okay, cool. So what I've done through is just knocked all of these little micro edges down. And again, areas that you want to reduce those, or you're going to have detailed images to it, do it. If it's not going to be in the rendering, don't do it. It's not worth the time, especially if you're doing larger stuff. If you're doing big industrial equipment, you're doing automotive. If you're not getting those up close shots, you won't see that edge. But it does make a huge difference. And that's what we'll talk about today, is a lot of those fine little details, even the materials, is really where you're going to see your renderings go from pretty good to great. So just fine tuning, fine tweaks can really separate. And we're just trying to beat the eye in that subconscious brain. All right, sorry guys, I got the screen shown. You should have seen it, but we're up and running. So I've walked through. I've got a configuration already. That configuration pulls in all of these broken edges to it. Now the next thing I'll do is walk through and just take a look at what I want for appearances. You can do this in Visualize, and this will make sense when we do the import. But my workflow, more and more, I've come back to the CAD model and started to apply appearances at this level. Just like configurations, you can also create display states. So I have a display state that's actually like the rendering assignments. They're not what I'm going to render. So when we send it over, we're just saying, these are the different groupings of materials that I'm looking to do. We're going to override those. The appearances in SolidWorks, they do go to Visualize. 99% of the time, I end up creating or overriding those appearances with a Visualize appearance themselves, because they have a little bit more to them. We'll maybe get into some like PBR materials or the NVIDIA library, but they get a little bit more complex when you get into the rendering tools. Not to say that they're not good enough to do, but I like to make sure that each appearance is identified. So coming back here, I'll just click through and just say, you know what? The main housing of this rotor, what I'll do is I want to have this set as a color. So I've already assigned that as a green. You'll see that in there. So you can click right at the assembly level and you see we have the appearance, and I'll assign for each one in this new display state. Now if I jump over here, I got purples and greens and blues and yellows. It looks terrible, but I also like to use these bright, obnoxious colors when I'm assigning here. So when I do go over to Visualize, I know what I've done, and I've taken and done my due diligence. I've applied in that new appearance, and I've gotten rid of the obnoxious one. I used to, and yeah, I still do in like complex assemblies. I'll hide them out as I kind of check them off. Like, I like this appearance, I think it looks good, hide the part. So in larger assemblies where this may be a little bit more work in the CAD side of things, or if you don't have access to the CAD model, you can also hide. All right. So basically, kind of wrapping up here, this is really all I do in SolidWorks. I'm going to go through, knock the edges, especially in detailed areas. Another never do if you're doing assembly design, I go back to my fasteners and I'll either create a helical sweep and cut that out, again adding unneeded complexity for production models, but for rendering, things like that, you know, finding where you're going to have actual threading. The SolidWorks toolbox, you can edit those and you can add them in. It's not a true helical sweep cut or a helical sweep cut all the way through, but it does give enough in terms of the rendering. All right. So it looks ugly. That's fine. We're going to have some fun over in Visualize. And there's two ways you can get there. For those that are using SolidWorks, we've got an add-in inside of here. And you can actually enable the Visualize add-in. You can turn this on. And let me just do it. I don't use this. I'll explain why. That gets into the import profiles. But this add-in will give you a tab right in the command manager. Really fast way just to send it over to Visualize. And we can actually start rendering right away. So they have a simple export. This just uses the automatic profile settings. So that just brings in kind of tries to figure out what's the best way. Do I want his colors and the parts and the bodies, or it looks at the model and it'll try to get that dialed in so you have the easiest workflow over there. The Export Advanced, this will give you two things. It gives you all of the motion studies if you've done any animations here. So it brings in those keyframes. So really fast way, and we won't get into animations today, but really fast way to generate out a photorealistic explosion view by letting SOLIDWORKS create those keyframes, and we can export those over. So that's the Export Advanced. And it also gives you a link. So if there's an update in the CAD model, you'll see that in Visualize. I don't use this, to be honest. I usually spend the time here, close it out, come back later on, and then I'll have my CAD model to access. Okay, so we're done with SOLIDWORKS. Let's get over to why we're here, and that's Visualize. Now, for everyone out there in the audience, I want you to be aware I'm working in Visualize Professional. There's two versions of Visualize. There's the standard version and the pro version. You can get onto the solidworks.com website, and it'll break down the big differences. But for, I tell everyone this: if you're involved in rendering, you're doing it almost on a, even a monthly basis. If you guys at your company or personally see getting more active in it, the professional version is what you'll need to upgrade to eventually. The sooner you do it, the more tools you have. There's a lot of capabilities. I'll try to highlight those as we go through. We're not here to push you on selling it, because the standard version does do a lot. It gives you the static images, but there are some great benefits that I'll be showing you today. So just be aware this is Viz Professional. All right, and I'm also working in that. We've got two modes. I've got the gray lighter mode. So if you guys look at this and say, that doesn't look like my Visualize, in the options, you can change the UI to a lighter color. I prefer it. So let's go in, and I'm going to open up my model. And while we're doing that, let's go back. I just want to see if we have any questions. Looks like our man Eric Beatty's in the audience as always. Thanks again, Eric. I think you haven't missed one single one. This is great to have. Andrew Gross, thanks, man. Seeing any other questions? Anyone know which graphic library SOLIDWORKS uses as a code? Is in terms of the graphic library SOLIDWORKS uses, I know that we use the sRGB space and graphical color code for the library here. I'm not sure what SOLIDWORKS uses. You may want to reach out to a reseller in terms of that and just put that question in. All right, cool. No other questions coming in, so let's keep going. All right, so at this point, we got to bring the CAD geometry in. And here we've got this obnoxiously colored model. That's fine. It kind of gives me a roadmap of, one, we're assigning and grouping the appearances, and two, we're having that checklist of things that I want to apply to. And now you're going to get into the import settings, and this is why I wanted to kind of walk through the process of the manual open. Now, the default that I recommend, if you're new to this, is just go to the automatic. And if you hover over, the tooltip will explain what these do, which is really nice. So use the best combination of layer appearance, appearance layer, layer, and appearance to bring it in. So it does look at what's already done, and it says what would make the easiest. 95% of the time, this works fantastic. But as a user that goes through and preps that model a little bit there, we can now predictively bring it in and really tell it to how we want to interact. So let me do the wrong thing first. So here I've got an appearance option. This is the fastest way to paint your model based on which surfaces have the same appearance and color. So I want to point this out because if you read these, this makes the most sense. This is the most intuitive way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and just add that, and we'll run this through. So the appearance is the grouping that we're bringing everything in. And you can go through and just walk. I don't have to get into all of these, but things like geometry, snap to floor, instancing. This is a nice enhancement. This speeds things up if you have instance parts. I generally unselect cameras and scenes. And I think last year, Visualize brought in, if you set up cameras inside of SOLIDWORKS, so maybe you had like a photo view 360 rendering, bunch of preset cameras. We can bring these in now and just repurpose those, which is really handy. I almost always unselect scene because it's usually the 4x3, like the white background. You're not going to use it. It just adds more clutter. So these two, since I'm going to create new ones, uncheck them. The appearances we want, that's already done. So I'll click the OK. And again, I'm just showing you what the appearance setting does, because right away, this looks awesome, cool. But what you'll notice if we come in and we see these greens, I actually missed this washer back here, and I'm gonna click it, and you'll notice that it's actually grabbing everywhere that we have green. So if I wanted to change that washer, I wouldn't have the option. In fact, coming into metal, we'll just bring that dark chrome. It's gonna apply it for the whole shebang, which kind of sucks, right? So like I didn't even start it, and it's already limiting to what I can do. Now, if you ever do run into this situation, first off, when you run the import, spend a few minutes, go through the model, and just click on things. And you're going to use a couple tools. So let me introduce the selection tool up top. We've got 4 ways to select. I use 2 of those 4 99% of the time. You can grab the whole model, so we can grab everything. We can grab the parts, and then we can grab groups and appearances. I'm always working between parts, groups, appearances. And when it's just static renderings, it's pretty much always appearances. So we're selecting an individual appearance versus a part. Now here you also notice that this is grouped this washer along with the overall internal structure. Again, because of the appearance settings, Visualize, even though these are separate components in SolidWorks, merge them together. So if I were doing like an animation and I wanted to do an explode, I can't grab that washer as is. So just be aware, those import settings, check the automatic. Even if you're using automatic, spend a minute, click around the appearances. Do I have full capability to author and change these as I need to? Because later on, as you get down the road and you find out I don't, oh man, it gets to be a little bit of a frustration. And I've been there many times. So I wanted to point that out. Now, with that said, I also want to point out this tool. And it's a super handy tool. Not a lot of users knows about it, but in this part selection mode, maybe I wanted to break this washer out to apply a different appearance to it. If I right click on it, under the edit, you can split part. All right, so we now are working with just a mesh version of the CAD model, all that calculated information that SolidWorks does. We don't have that. And now we can start breaking up this mesh. So I can split that part. So again, just right clicking right on that washer, right click, split it, and then you'll see this little window comes up, part splitting. The default, I think it always goes to 20 degrees. So this is just the facet angles and how they're joined up. I've got a little fillet in there. So let's try, once it's up, you still got to click what you want to split, and you're going to get a representation. Here you can see all these triangles come through. If I click execute split, it would then just break up those triangles into one new part, and I could extract that out. Let's go up maybe to 45 degrees. Perfect. So right there we see now it's breaking around that. Again, I rounded that edge off, and we're getting into the washer, and I can hope that it's all the way around. I know it is. So I'm going to execute the split. All right. This tool, the command stays up, so we can walk around and do the additional, but just close that out. Now what you'll see is I have the washer I can click, which is great. That was the intention in the first place. And then now I have a separate component to apply it to. Now I want to point this out too. You'll see here, it didn't quite grab everything I want. You can subdivide these up as well. So I can come in, continue to execute splits. I can grab this face, maybe increase this to 90, see if we can't grab it. It's maybe not the greatest one, but we'll execute that. And then you can always come back and you can control select, and right on the general tab, and I'm working within kind of the model structure, you can merge the parts. So not only can I split parts away from each other if they come in merged, but then we can merge them back together, giving this new part. So that looks better. We actually merged it with that. I must have selected that too. But just be aware that, first we're trying to avoid having to do this all together with the import settings. So spend some time, check out the model, make sure it makes sense. And if you later on realize, oh no, I want to get this part, I can't, you can still split those out and you can merge things back together to manage it. So those are some tips I wanted everyone to know. Again, a lot of the rendering time is just the upfront kind of work into, is the model clean? Does it have nice round edges? Is it manageable? Can I get to my desired effects that I'm going for? And for me, every single component that's visible should have a unique appearance. Even if they're the same appearance, they should differ a little bit, because that's when you get the contrast between these. That's how things are in life. Look around you. Even, I have two of the identical rotors right here, but these two materials, even though they're the same materials, don't look the same. So you want to replicate that in your models. It's a little extra work, totally worth the time. So let's go back. I'm going to open this up. We'll do it one more time. In this case, since I've done my workflow where I assign all these appearances, instead of using what makes the most sense, I'm going to use the layer appearance. The group appearance maybe sounds smart, but if you hover over it, this is for like Autodesk alias files. They got a specific one for .wire files. So if you're using that, you can bring it in. That's a specific profile for .wire files. In this case, layer appearance. So what this does, perfect world, is it grabs the assembly structure and then it prioritizes all of those appearances. So it's the best of everything. Again, let's just check it. I've got my part selection tool. Cool. Washers I can click individually. The floats I can click. I click the appearances, even though they're the same green, you'll notice that, and this is a mess up. I should have maybe given this a pink or an orange or something else in CAD, but I did that on purpose to show you that this import still gives me a lot of flexibility. All right, so that's a lot of the work that goes into it, is just prepping the model, spending the time up front. Let me look at any questions. So it looks like, could we add imperfections as like fingerprints and small scratches? Yes, we can. So I will get there. I'll show you adding those imperfections, because it does, it's another thing. We never see things in perfect form. I mean, even out of the machine shop, if you look at a perfectly machined part, maybe not if it's gotten into like a high level polish, but you're going to see toolpath on there. You can add those, and those things take that really good rendering to that pro level, and just the eye looks at it and they don't even think twice. Like, oh, it's a picture. Great. Cool. Moving on. So we want to add imperfections where we can without obviously making it look rusty or gross. So great question. Great point. One on graphics cards. So we can talk about that real quick. So right now I was debating on what to use. I have a tower that it's an older M6000 24 gig. So it's a pretty big, card. Back in the day, they were $6,000, $5,000. You could probably get one used, but I think it's replaced now with the Pascal series or the new Tesla series. So yeah, I mean, this stuff is pretty heavy in terms of graphics card, but for the webinar, I'm actually running off my laptop. So it's a M2200. It's a mobile workstation. Yeah, it's the M22. It's Maxwell. It's not even Pascal. So it's an older one, but this is a fairly simple rendering. So things like reflections, a lot of shadow detail, transparency. So if you're doing a lot with glasses, water, a lot of data, so big assemblies, you're going to want to ramp up. If you're doing animations, time to render images are going to go up. There really is no direct way around it besides having things like this denoiser available. So a couple of years ago, they've added this. It's using AI to actually kind of interpolate pixels around the area when it's doing the rendering. And that's why I can get away with this. So the graphics card, that's a long conversation. I really recommend reach out to your resellers. There's always at least 1, 2, or 10 graphics gurus there. I'm more than happy to sit down with you and go over hardware forever. But make sure it's certified from SOLIDWORKS.com. Make sure you've got a certified driver. In this case, we highly recommend not using gaming cards, but in Visualize, they will work. So you can build up a machine, but yeah, scaling it up and ready to go. Okay, cool. So at this point, what I started doing is I start actually, we've checked the model, everything looks good. Now I can start applying the appearances. The default ones, they're generic, color 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to override these. And a lot of times here, I'll work between these two rendering modes. So the preview mode, this is just going to be rasterized. If I'm doing things like animations or moving, changing where the model is, maybe we want to lay it down on the floor. We want to have multiple instances of the model on here, which we can do here. At this point, work in this mode because we don't have to rely on these heavy graphics cards to actually process when all I'm doing is repositioning. So just think twice, what am I doing next? Do I need to be rendering? If you're modifying geometry, clicking through the model or so on, no. In this case, we are going to start looking at appearances. So I'm going to go to the fast mode. This isn't going to be using full-on ray tracing through the model. I don't have much for glass or transparencies in here. Right now, nothing really reflective, even though we'll still get that. So this is going to give me good performance, and we can start applying appearances. Let's jump over to my library. And in the library, if you're not familiar with Visualize, this is kind of where all the meat and potatoes reside. But I'm going to grab the appearances, and we're going to start working with the basic library that's with Visualize. Now, what's great in here is it's not overly complicated, and these are really easy to customize. It's something I'm learning that as I get into other rendering tools, it can be a little bit more frustrating. So we allow for you to simplify the library and then build your own, customize it as need be. So back to the question on scratched detailing. Inside of here, we actually have a scratched appearance, and that's what I'm going to use for this outer rotor. So I'm going to move in, and let's see if we can't get zoom in nice to that. And you'll see real-time rendering's on, so we'll get that appearance to actually apply and show you that it's scratched. If I change to the accurate, not a big difference. There really is no difference needed in this material to render it. So let's take advantage of the faster one. And again, you'll notice I have the denoiser on. That'll render and then boom, snap to a better final render. So it's a nice option to keep on if you have access to it. So this material automatically brings in this texture, but it's a little aggressive. So I'll start to paint the model, and it's an iterative process, I'll admit. A lot of times I'll start, maybe paint everything into my model, apply the materials here, or a lot of times when I know there's a main focus, like on this, that rotor is a huge focus of the model. I just kind of dive in and start it up there. But you might go into one appearance, apply the rest, come back. It really depends on your workflow. It is iterative. I find myself kind of jumping around. But let's focus on this one, and we'll talk about materials. So once that's assigned from the library, so I'm over on the right-hand side, these are all the, what we have on our hard drive. We're bringing them in from the library and applying it. Then that becomes a new instance in the actual appearance tab. So this is what's actually assigned in the library. And these I can modify. What I'm going to do in this case, on the scratched appearance, we'll just take a look at how it's broken down. And let me pull this out a little bit. All right, so we've got this appearance. It's metal. So these different drop downs by default have different characteristics. Like for instance, if I were to change it to plastic gives me all sorts of stuff like this highlight color, diffusion color. I can actually make it transparent to it. We can select it as a solid, so we look at how light moves through it. It gets pretty complicated. So if you're using these, you want to stick with that basic setting. Well, you can tweak these. You can come in and maybe change the color. Maybe we want to go to a little bit darker gray. Do it incrementally. You don't have to go crazy. Obviously, black's going to get you there. But you'll notice that just small tweaks, either through HSV values here. You can use the little color dropper if you want to steal something, like I grabbed the background. But super easy to modify. And I'm not changing the library one. I'm just changing the instance in this model. When we're looking at textured materials like the default one here, you're going to find on the texture side, we have a couple options that this metal comes in. Specular, which basically just gives in how light is going to be coming off of this. We can create different maps. And for the video gamers out there, you guys, next time you're out, especially the first person shooter games, playing those, just look at the amount of technology that goes into the materials. It's it's crazy. You can even just get on Google and get lost, or on YouTube looking at rendering materials. And all of that comes down to being able to create all of these different maps. So how is light being reflected off? Basically placing decals and wrapping these around there is how these complex materials get there. And we can do that in Visualize. So an alpha channel is essentially like a transparency. So if I had my name written in black and the rest transparent, I could slap that on there, and that would just let the everything else defined come through. So you can add that, but in this case, we're looking at the bump map. So bump map is what actually gives that look of like texture, right? So making it come 3D. And that's a huge thing to do right away in the rendering, because that's what we see in real life. Everything has that nice texture. Even if it's perfectly polished, looks like a texture. So from the library, this bump map comes in and it has these scratches. And all this is, in fact, we'll click on here. We can go into the installation. You can see what these bump maps look like. They're generally just a grayscale. And that grayscale is telling the rendering software where to push and pull the surface. So you can start to push and pull. You can also see these like more colorful ones. This is actually giving XYZ difference in how to push pull that out. So you get these 3D effects just by overlaying it. The rendering software recognizes that, and it can accommodate these bump maps. So play around with them. You can obviously bring them in. These are really easy to find online. If you just Google like wood grain bump map, you can generally find the image, drop it in, and apply it. You can also make your own. I've taken photographs of materials and brought it into like a Photoshop, got into a grayscale, and just use that to generate your own. So it may feel complicated at first. It's not. It's really some basic technology that we can take advantage of. So I've got a bump map already that's giving this. I like it. It looks good. But just start to play around with the slider. Remember, we're working in real-time rendering, so I can see how this affects my actual render. Bump strength just gives it like how much texture can we feel. We don't want to go too rough, so let's just move it down. Maybe something real minor. We can almost totally get rid of this. We can get rid of the scratches, but just something to add a little bit on there. Now it is tiling this, so it is going to be throughout the model, and I'll zoom in a little bit more so you guys can see what's going on there. Perfect. So tiling is just going to move the location. Getting into the mapping, we can actually change how this is laid on the model. This is a cylindrical model, so we may want to change the mode. You've got options here. Check them out. The box in this case actually works great. Planar works great. Planar is just going to be flat and projected through. But again, rendering in real time, you don't need to know these at all. Just try them. What does cylindrical look like? This case, not bad, but there's like some weird aspect here. It looks like this is where the cylindrical starts and ends. I don't love it. I played around with these earlier. I know that box works great. It's getting the job done, so perfect. So yeah, that's basically creating more of these lifelike materials. You start with a color. You can get really advanced and do things like apply multiple layers. PBR would be the thing to research if you want to geek out a little bit more. These physically based rendering materials. PBR lets you set up to, I think, 7 different layers that give things like how much light's reflecting, how much shininess, how much wear, those things, any displacement maps, what displacement maps are coming through. And that's where you get into like what Hollywood uses. We can do it here. Do you need to? Most of the time not, but it's available. All right, so I like that. I may go back when I start setting up cameras and change that, right? But so far so good. So let's keep moving through and start applying a few more. Now in this case, I've got a couple shortcuts I want to highlight. One is we'll hit on these kind of this floating insert, these rivets. So one thing you can do is I've got all these yellows. That means that I've told myself ahead of time, Mike, I want all the yellow to be the same material. And if I do that by dragging in, it doesn't apply it this way. And that's just how it's grouped. But you can do a few things. One, beforehand, we could group like appearances. So let's go back. 2, we could just come into the appearance itself in this color 3. If I click it, you can see those are all there. And I could just manually say, you know what, I want this to be metal. I want it to be, anodized red. And I want to rough it up a little bit. While I'm here, I want to point out this roughness. This is a super handy, Eric, just saw your comment, PBR does not mean Pabst Blue Ribbon. No, it does not, but I think about it every time. Too funny. I do want to point out the roughness. This is an area that everyone should be aware of when you're doing metals, and we're all going to be working with some sort of metal at some point. So modify this, change it a little bit. I think more often than not, I see renderings that are done where things are way too shiny, right? It's too shiny. It's too unrealistic. So roughness is a really simple way. Just hit that slider up a little bit. We can zoom in here and just see a comparison. So this has got almost like an anodized finish to it. What's that sweet spot? That looks good. Let's go actually more to a regular like chrome. And what I want to illustrate is that, man, you go crazy shiny like this, I don't know. No bike rotor company is gonna pay their mold or someone to polish those inserts. There's no way. So just be aware. You got to add a little roughness. That's just dulling it down. It's not making it as reflective, and it's more consistent with what you're used to. All right, so that's another way you can do it in a bulk format, is saying, well, let me just find the original color that was a yellow, and I want to apply it there. The other way, a really cool tip, is I'm just going to use this copper, and we'll just drag it onto that one. Well, once it's assigned from the library, over on this side, you'll see it's available. I can also right-click and just do an edit copy, or we all know Control-C. And then coming back to this color, you can right-click, edit, and you can assign the copper polished to all those instances. So a few ways to do it that way, really easy. The last way, sorry, I'm throwing a lot at you, is I just use a shift left click and shift right click. So inside of here, let's do one more. Let's do our, what I actually want to go with is maybe like this dark chrome. So if I like that, shift left click, shift right click, just copies and pastes it right to the model. Makes it super easy. Shift left, shift right, and you can do it in bulk, shift right, and just fly through. So that's my go-to, but I will tell you if there are a lot of appearances that are grouped as it comes in, just that copy and then assign appearance as, super fast way, and not really that discoverable. So I wanted to highlight that. All right, let me check on some questions. So 4D modding, you've got, can Visualize be used to unwrap a model? As of right now, it can't. We're hoping to get that into a future release. So the question comes into UV unwrapping, basically taking a model, laying it flat, like if just skinning the thing flat out, and then having that as a map where you could paint in all of the appearances. Really common, like if you think of, again, going back to the analogy of video games and first-person type shooter games, you got a gun, and that gun's going to have wear on edges and so on. Well, what they do is they actually unwrap that whole gun in pieces, and then they use those to lay it out. And then in the rendering software, they rewrap that on, and that's called UV wrapping and UV unwrapping. Visualize doesn't have it. You can still apply a UV decal inside of here. So if you have that, you can bring it in. The good news is, and without making any promises, but there is talk about allowing it. We have technology from Dassault Systems, our parent company, that does do it with 3D Excite. So we're really hoping to get it here. If you want to see it, let your reseller know. Say yes, UV unwrapping. I'm hearing it more and more. Otherwise, if you really want to geek out, there are free tools out there. I think a lot of you are probably aware of, like Blender, that does do it. It's just pretty complicated. You gotta have a little finesse to figure it out. See any other questions coming in here? I'm gonna take a sip of water. Not sponsored by, but for any fans of fizzy water out there, let me know what's your favorite fizzy water brand and flavor. Been on a big bubbly kick lately, and shout out to Brad Williamson for his big birthday. We got him pretty much a lifetime supply of this stuff. So good. All right, let's see. We've got a question. Looks like Mark Peterson, you're answering on including alpha. So just doing transparencies in the background, bringing it in. We'll show that in the output. Yeah, we'll get to removing the background. So let's fly through. I think you guys got kind of the gist of, where to look at these appearances coming into this. I think we want to bring that roughness down a little bit on that break. Looks good. Apply that. So let's just do a couple more, and we'll just get these screws. Again, sometimes you've got stuff in the library that works great. I'm just going to use a regular chrome on these. Awesome. That's a sign. When I click it, you can globally, modify maybe the roughness there of that chrome. You can add textures, texture map, and so on to anything that you've pulled from the library. And then last, let's just do like an anodized treatment to this component. Maybe a little too rough, and maybe we want a little brighter red. And pretty quick, we went from a really ugly model to something that looks pretty good. So that's my workflow so far. Start in CAD, clean it up, get it ready, import it, check the import. Does everything make sense and work? Is it manageable? Do I need to break anything apart? Do I need to merge stuff? All right, looks good. Start applying the appearances. I generally work with, what's going to be the most standout appearance and then back down from there. And then we'll start to iterate as we go through. So next I'll do is look at the scene, because this is where we start to say, well, do I like the lighting? And right now I don't. I think it looks, you can't even see the model. So back over on the libraries tab, just like we had the appearances, there's these environments. If I call them scenes, I mean environments. The default has a ton in here. There's also a cloud version. You can open this up, maybe download stuff that are out there in the server, which is our server that you can access to. The other one is there's hdrscenes.com. Google it. Free, massive HDR scenes that you can bring in as well. Really scale up your library. They go all the way up to like 16K resolution. I should add that you need a pretty decent graphics card just to process the scene itself, the environment itself. But a great resource. So again, that's hdrscenes.com, or Google it. It might be a hyphen in there. And once you play around, you'll start to kind of recognize scenes that are your go-to. I think a lot of studio photography. So generally just basic lighting. I don't do a lot of rendering that actually has, an outdoor appearance to it, but they're available in here. I'll generally just use what they call a backplate, which is an image, and align it to that. But they're available, so you can play around. So for example, whatever this one is, if you do bring it in and you're not seeing anything, you can go, again, just like appearances, once we apply it, it has its own little place to live. But this is a backplate, and this has been brought across from the import. We get rid of it, and then here we can see this is like that full 3D scene. So they're cool. They're definitely, definitely have their time and their place. For product imagery, if you're doing like design reviews, you got a stakeholder you want to send an update to, keep it simple. Let them focus on the product at hand. We don't need to try to completely trick them. So yeah, I'll just surf through these, and I get to, where I'm pretty happy, but I'm still going to apply some lighting to it. And I also generally will remove out the visual of the scene. So what I mean, kind of like that, we'll work with this, is on that scene setting, and it does remember what you've applied, so you can always go back and say, well, the blurred was good, or, this is good. In fact, I'm going to use I love using this just chrome or the high contrast lighting. Yeah, it's pretty cool. You get some cool effects in there. So again, just play around, see what you like. This is where it gets to be the fun part, right? The artistic part where you get to really put your expression into it. So we'll use the chrome standard, and then we can start to modify it. So things like, in this case, we have 3 big panel lights that maybe we want to spin around. You can rotate these. There's just this rotation setting. And this is a fast way to just kind of get you a good baseline, right? We want to make sure we're highlighting the model to what we like. That looks good. Brightness. Do you even want to use this, or do you want to completely control the lighting? Just turn it off. Oh, turn off the lights. Can't see anything. Go back, a little less bright, so on. So there's some basic controls. Gamma, I won't get into this. You can Google gamma, but it's just a correction on brightness. The human eye, we don't see linear like you would think. The cameras do, so that's just a basic correction in terms of how bright things are being reflected back. Slider bar, it's real-time rendering. Play with it, see what it does. So I kind of worked through that. Floor effects, we'll get into that maybe later, but this is a simple one, and it's usually a last resort I do, is just bring in maybe a reflection. I like that. It just gives that little bit of realism, but again, I do that towards the end. So we've got a basic studio, I've applied my materials. This is where I start to come through, and I was going to mention on the background. you can also, on that general tab, so again, I'm working in the scene, modifying that Chrome Studio. I love just having a basic color background. So just knocking this out to a gray. Question being, we can render this out and remove all of that. So just using an alpha channel, and then later change those backgrounds in like a Photoshop or even PowerPoint. But I still will kind of get me within the realm of kind of that hue value and the saturation value I might be working with. Because if I do bright white here and then later on do, a dark gray in my Photoshop application, it sometimes doesn't look as cool as I was hoping for. So still use this even if you're going to render out those alpha channels. In this case, it looks good so far. I think it's still pretty dull. So we're going to add some lights. All right, let me update that. So again, we're using like 3 basic lights in the studio. It gets me pretty good. But next on the scenes is just adding in different lighting to this. You have a couple ways to do it. There's Pick Target, which was new in 2018, I think, where you can actually just click right where you want a light to hit. So grab this. Cool. I like that. When it came out, I thought it was a really great enhancement. I still think it's a really great enhancement. I don't use it as often as I did. So let me delete that. I just want to show you can do a light that way. Pick Position, where you actually place the light. I never use that. What I almost always do is just match the camera. Because to me, I can look at this and say, you know what? I kind of want a studio light coming from right here. I think that would really help. New light, match current camera. And then I can start to see where that light's actually hitting. So far, I think that looks good. Tweak these values. What does brightness do if we go to like 15? Usually like doubling or halving seems to work best, and it really helps you refine, kind of converge at your correct value. Sliders here as well. A lot of times with these, you may want to just check and see what that accurate rendering does for you. So depending on the light you're using, so different lights will require these. In this case, this light doesn't need that, but just be aware. You might want to just see, is there a big difference, or am I still good to use that faster mode? In this case, for sure. So we can start to apply it. But what I want to point out is that coming back, off of that light, you can also modify the position. And those lights come in as parts. So I mentioned earlier the selection tools. Let's go ahead and grab part, and let's grab that light. And here we can see, I'm working with a panel light. Maybe we want to modify that position. We've got this little manipulation tool. And there's 2 ways to do it. You can do it where it's looking, and you can do it where it's at. And these are related in terms of this green line. So if we move this blue over here, that starts to move that light around. You can rotate the panel light. The gray line will bring it closer and farther. Just be aware, this is kind of a nice way to fine tune it. So come in, create your panel lights, and you'll come back and probably refine these a little bit later on. But this is where you can start having fun. So I've got this light here. Let's create another one. Maybe you want to do like a cool backlight. I'm going to swing this around. You can go into just the raster rendering tool. I never got those washers. Oh well. Let's create a new light. So again, match current camera. Something to backlight that a little bit. Maybe that looks good. Maybe I'm going to go for a shot like this, but you can start to just lay out these lights as needed. You can always go back. You can turn them on and off if you don't need them. You can configure these to different scenes and so on. But, spend a little time. If you've got a product that's got certain design elements that you really want to highlight, use lighting to do so, just like you would in a studio. You can check your lighting. You can kind of validate whether or not I really, really like this by just turn off the lights on the scene. So again, on that brightness, 0. Completely off. Doesn't seem like the lights are doing a whole lot. Well, maybe modify the brightness and so on those. It seems like the scene light's doing most of the work. No big deal. Just click on them here as we go through. Let's do like a 300. Maybe crank this one up. 30. 180. Again, check your render mode. We might need to be something there. And you can start to refine those lights to get you in the ballpark or where you want to be. And distance matters too, so you might want to bring them forward, make them bigger, smaller. it's all in the UI. It's all pretty standard to do. There are different types. So I use a lot of these area lights. Want to show you, this is super cool. They have new for a couple years ago or like profiles. So if you're doing like architectural type stuff, interior stuff, even if you're doing product photography and you're laying out, an item and you have just a singular light, use these IES profiles. This actually will build a different, give like an effect to it. Here's a pro tip for you. It'll look at the Visualize content library. If you change this out to, go to large or small icons and have your preview window available inside. Here's the pro tip. Took me a second. Change your file type to all files. If you don't know what you're looking for, this will pull up, because inside of this location, that just selected one, this will pull up your PNG as well. So the point I was trying to get at is like a large icon. There we go. That's the view I was looking for. IES, the actual file itself you would use, and then an example of what it does. So just be aware, these are another really cool way to add like photorealistic lighting to your model. And this one, I'm not going to use it, but if you do like a single overhead and if you had a background, it actually gives that, that bloom, that type of, shape that a light would actually cast. So be aware. And those two are pretty easy to find online. All right, so we've gone through, set up the model. We did that in CAD, brought it in. We got some materials going. Maybe at this point I've got lights. I would maybe iterate back to the materials through this process, shiny or so on. But we'll move forward here to my lab. And this is the cameras. This is kind of the big part of it that really is fun. So it's like in a real shoot, right? If you were to have a model come in, you would do their makeup. You would talk to them about, what shots are we going for? What's the look and feel? The last thing you do is you grab the camera. So here we're going to walk through, grab that camera. Let me go through, looks like some questions coming in. So what is an advantage of unwrapping and mapping? So the advantage of that is it actually allows you to assign very specific locations of appearances. In this case, we're basically applying an appearance to an entire face, like on the texture here. I don't have a great way without using like a decal. I mean, think of it as just a really, really perfectly created decal for your model. So unwrapping the model and creating this massive decal that you can wrap back over it. I always just think of like a gun and wear on an edge. On this break, we could create rust or we could create some corrosion right along the edge with this unwrap and wrap. Differences from Substance Designer. So Substance Designer creates the actual appearances for you to apply. So just be aware, like the Substance Algorithmic is a company that do software, allows you to create really complex surfaces or complex materials and appearances to apply. We can take full advantage of those depending on the output format. But if they're pushed out as a PBR or you get the PBR, you can do that. So good question. Another case showed up yesterday. Apple. Yeah. Let's see. Cool. Yeah, a lot of questions on materials. You do some research. It's an endless wormhole of fun. YouTube has a lot of great videos, but right now, Visualize, we're trying to stay on top of materials and support as many different options as we can. Last year we brought in PBRs, which was massive. And again, that just gives us that tons of ability to layer these in to really to pop. Jacob, looks like you're answering a question. Appreciate those in the audience helping me out. Is there a way to scale the size or environment of lights? Yes, there are. You can do it a few different ways in terms of like lighting on the scene size. You can do it right from here. They've got, I'll actually show that light. You can just grab the width, length of it. You can also use the scale tool right from here. And in terms of scaling the actual environment itself, if you go into the advanced tab inside of here, they have the size. So you can just bring the relative size of that. And that's kind of the dome that's around it, bring it in and out as well. So you can modify those inside of there. So good questions. All right, so let's jump over to the last step. 1 o'clock. Sorry guys, I'm going a little long here. We're almost done with the workflow. But here's where Viz Pro to me is probably one of the top features to create multiple cameras. I always leave the default camera there. This is my go-to for spinning around and viewing the model, moving lights, changing the location of the part or other parts, whatever. It's my like trash camera. It's me. It's my view. Here I start to create just new cameras. So right click, new camera, or just the plus option here. And I'll bring these in. And almost always the first thing I'll do, obviously zoom in. You can use the little cube to get your default views as well, just by selecting left, right. Good place to start for product renderings. You generally want to have just those standard isometric views. You can grab them from the drop down. But I'll change things like the focal length. So this 119.6, I'd love to know why or what that number comes from. You create a default camera, that's what comes in. So think of in terms of how you'd shoot with a DSLR. I've got mine here in the background. A lot of times with up close photography, I'm shooting a little bit wider. Or you're shooting like 85 mil, more of a zoom. So for reference, the human eye is 50 millimeters on a standard sensor, so standard kind of camera. 50 millimeters is what we generally see. Anything below that, smaller number, is wide. Anything above that is more of a telephoto type lens, more of a zoom. Good to know if you're trying to use an actual image backplate. If you say, hey, this image I took on my desk was done with a 50 millimeter lens, and you put that in here in the scene, use a 50 millimeter perspective here to help align that. But just be aware, I always usually start to adjust those. And then depth of field. We'll come in and start to actually give a little blur. And I think that every rendered image should have a little depth of field, because any pro DSLR is going to have a little in there unless you're shooting like landscape stuff. But this type, depth of field. Now you'll have less depth of field when we're using wider lenses, but you can still see in the background this is blurring out. You'll also know it's slowing down my render time. So there is a trade-off there. When you start applying things like depth of field, you're adding more complexity to the rendering. Your rendering is going to slow down. So in like animations, each frame is going to take longer. So you gotta kind of weigh those pros and cons. But to me, it's a huge part of that. There's some values to these. I go by the f-stop value. So the smaller the number, the more blur you'll have, foreground of your focus point. So things like if I go to like 5 here in the model, you probably can't see it too well as it's rendering, but you'll see it's not quite as blurry. If we go to like 0.1, well, super tight blur. A little chaotic there. Pro lenses are anywhere from like 1.2, 1.0 all the way up. So again, bigger number, more sharpness, the further and closer you go from your pick point, your focus point. And then I start to just really have fun with cameras. This is, what if I could go in and shoot with a wide angle lens? Let's bring it in. Telephoto lens, move here. And to me, this is a huge iterative process because I want to get this angle, but there's just not a good light. Okay, well, let's just come back to scenes and let's add a light. And this is why I love that new light, match current camera. What can we do to brighten this up as I'm looking at it from this camera? Gives a little more pop. Cool, this camera looks good. I like this lens, this angle. Maybe a good opportunity to play around with that scene. So adding in, going back and doing things like the floor reflection. That makes a big difference right there alone. Adding a little shadow back there, adding that floor reflection. This thing is starting to come to life. So a lot of the work you put in to visualize, and one of my big points here is that upfront work, spend the time there. You may not see that be photorealistic right away. It can come at the very end of the project. You can start to find these little tweaks, like adding a little bit of floor reflection, floor shadow. What happens if we increase that? On the cameras tab, what happens if we come into these filters, like getting into a thing called bloom, and bloom gives it that haze around there. What if I enable bloom? Way too much bloom there, but what if I add a little of that? That might just give, again, that extra little bit of photorealism that I is so used to in our renderings. In the advanced filter, in filters, even adding like some post-processing if you don't want to go to a Photoshop, what happens here? So we can change maybe, I like to generally add just a little bit of vignette. Vignette is just kind of that darkness around it, helps you focus in. It's actually supposed to be a bad thing in terms of lenses. But we can add a little vignette to this, darken that up, really focus in. Let's refine my lens a little bit. Perfect. So just start stacking these cameras in, start refining lights. I didn't get into configurations, but you can configure these lights with scenes to be on and off. And then pretty soon you'll have a library of images you're ready to render. All right, let me check in with the panel here. Can you show the floating function of the disc brake and the different parts? We can get in probably in a later one, but the question I think really comes into creating explosions. So if you want to modify the position of anything, here's a great way. A lot of times I just, instead of creating a new configuration, save as and just say explode view. You can also, I've got the link to CAD enabled, so I could go back to SOLIDWORKS, do it there, save it, and it would automatically update here, which is a really, really fast way to do it as well. Switch between the two. But the question is, like, how do we make this thing float? I go back to my render selection, use this tool, the raster mode, just because performance-wise. Let's grab the entire model and let's, just move it up. So render selection is rasterize. I'm grabbing the entire model with my selection tool, and I can just pull the whole object up, bring that into place. And obviously I have to reset my cameras. For each individual part, you simply just grab the part mode, and we can control select on these. Maybe today, maybe not. Start grabbing those and just pull them out and just position those as is. So modifying these, pretty easy to do. I do have some other workflows again where I'll set those up in SOLIDWORKS, and I use the live update just to save in SOLIDWORKS and have it update here. Because I personally think there's better control in the CAD environment for exploded views than when we do here. So just kind of, I challenge you to play with that workflow yourself. All right, so let me back up here if we can bring that down. And let me jump over and just show you what like a final model would look like. We don't need to save this. A final project that maybe I have done. I've got... And we can call it a day because I'm definitely over time here, which I don't think you guys mind. All right, so you'll see that when I'm working through these, I'm not shy from creating a lot of save as. I do this as a versioning. You can version these in like PDM if you're using SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional. There is a connector for it. So for those out there that are, I'm just working locally. I should be working on my vault for these, but I'll just do save as. Once I get to a point I'm happy with, I like this, but I want to keep going and experiment. So just kind of a branching type workflow. I've got one final colors. In this case, I've gone through, I set up all my materials. I created a decal. So again, getting back to the level of realism. So let me just get into default camera. I created a decal that actually gives a little bit of a gradient just in Photoshop. Created a circle. Thick line with a gradient across it. You can do it in PowerPoint. Save that out as a PNG with that transparency. And I applied that here. You'll see over my decals, this brake rotor decal. And it just gives this little extra realism. You probably wouldn't even notice that unless I pointed it out or you started to look really close. I did just a little bit of texture on here. My goal was to apply just kind of a CNC path to it, looking at the actual rotor that was there. Super minor detail. Split lines, I painted the faces there. That was done in CAD. This could be a decal as well. So two options. One, in CAD at the split line, or two, bring in any type of, decals are huge for bringing realism. Any text that you have, make sure you have a way to portray that within the rendering. People are going to notice those. And then we started to basically build up the cameras. I get another one where I have like 80 cameras for it and start to render these out. From there, we got our final renderings, and I had some examples. I think I pulled those away, but I can send those into the zip file. or sorry, the link. Let's just jump over. I'm going to show you because this kind of is a project that I've been working on for animations that we reproduced for. I wanted to show you guys because I thought it was a good example. So down, I've got the spikes folder, my Hope Float rotor, and again, all of my projects. And oh yeah, I got tons of great images here. So some of the finals that we did, these are the renders. So everything I did going into what I just showed you, we're just adding animations to it. Depth of field, we've got things like bloom, making sure I've got textures, making sure every material has its own appearance applied to it. Accounting for any graphics or decals. Applying, I've got the cut extrudes on the fasteners for it. All those little things are what you should be focused on when you're approaching a render to really make it pop. Make sure things aren't overly shiny. I argue that I think I overdid the fasteners here, but that can start to build a pretty cool, render static or even getting in animations with not too much effort. So let me check back into our comments. Looks like got a few. Can you show the floating function? So is it Genepot? I'm not clear. Pick, I'm not sure. See you guys, thanks. Awesome. Another one I did, here's just some sunglasses. I didn't get into this, but same thing. I bring in a model. You can just copy and paste the model 3 times over in one scene, apply different appearances, and create a depth of field, just to show like a color swatch. So just another example of what Visualize is capable of. And again, just spend a little time, just tweak those edges, find the details. So with that, I'm over my time. A lot of questions. I really hope this was valuable. I wanted to kind of shoot from the hip a little bit because that's my process. I'm ironing it out more and more. I always start in CAD, cleaning it up. But when I get into there, it's appearances, get into the scene, the environment, add the lights, start working with the cameras. Once you have the cameras, you're going to back up and you're going to kind of iterate through those appearances, refine them, tweak the lights a little bit. Once you're finally happy, then it's just rendering out. Rendering outputs, I either use a PSD file or I use a TIFF file or PNG, depends on but you can use those alpha. There's a button to enable alpha layers. And a lot of times I do go to like Photoshop just to kind of tweak last minute things, but more and more recently I've been using the filters and the post-processing there to speed up that. So cool. I want to say thanks for everyone for tuning in. It's been a really fun hour and 12 minutes. Happy Friday. I hope you all have a great weekend, a great, safe, fun weekend. And again, next Friday, we're off. The weekend after, we got Michael Steves doing apps for kids, really, really great modeling tools. So if you got little ones, tune in with them. And the following week, Brian Zayas, definitely can't miss because, as he said, quote, something cool. I'm looking forward to it. All right, with that, thanks everyone. Talk to you soon.